Hi, it's Tom here again, and today I'm going to run you through the reforestation modelling tool, which I call the RMT. The RMT is a useful program that gives you an understanding of how much carbon is taken up as part of a carbon sequestration project under the environmental plantings, mallee plantings, or human-induced regeneration methods. Once you know this value, it can be used along with other project information to help you calculate your net abatement, which influences how many ACCUs you'll be issued. In this tutorial, we'll step through the main features of the tool and its functional aspects using a permanent environmental plantings of native tree species method example. This not only leads you through the use of the tool, but also illustrates what will be sequestered if you decide to establish a project on your property. You will have seen the downloading information provided in the online module, so I'll assume that you have downloaded the RMT to your computer, and I'll walk you through using the tool and interpreting the results. To help you with this process, I'm going to use a permanent environmental plantings to show you how I use the tool to estimate the amount of carbon. I'll only be doing a small planting, but that should give you all the basics you need to use the program yourself. Here's the tool on my computer, which I will now open and take you through. Once the program is open, it's worthwhile to navigate around to understand the RMT, which is quite straightforward. The major navigation tabs are on the left side, Project, Management and Results, and clicking on each will open a new window where I can enter information or see my results. There are some default lat-long values automatically entered, which I'll write over later. It's important to note here that some of those navigation tabs are dimmed at this point, but you'll see that change as I enter the required information. So let's get started on tab 1, Project Information. So here I have to enter some of the key information about my project. If you use the mapping tool or even watch the mapping tool tutorial, you will be familiar with the naming conventions I use here. If not, I am naming the different carbon estimation areas within my broader project area. Remember, using the same CEA name is a good idea for all steps of your project. So I will enter the name of my broader project, and then the specific area within that where I'm estimating carbon. So my project name is Fairman Fields and I'm estimating the back paddock. Note, if I want to work out the amount of carbon in the front paddock, I have to create a different project using the Project Information tab. With the names clear and defined, I must enter the latitude and longitude of the CEA in decimal format. Check that the latitude is a negative value, otherwise the tool will assume the CEA is somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere. I've already used the mapping tool earlier, so this information is the model point I determined. If I used another program to determine the lat-long, I would need to make sure the data are in decimal degrees before they are entered. So I'll enter the values here. They are blurred on screen for privacy reasons. Now I click Download Site Information so the RMT can understand where my project is in Australia and the likely productivity of that region. I'll follow this up by entering the area of my plantings, which I've worked out from the CEA that I map using the mapping tool after the excluded area adjustments. You can also use the Notes section to enter any relevant information about the planting itself. You'll see now that the Management tab on the left has changed from grey to red, which means I need to click on it to begin entering information. First up, I need to enter the start date, which I've decided is the start of October. Just as in farming, what I'm deciding to plant is known as a rotation, and so I need to click on the Rotations menu to add a new rotation. A window will pop up where I get to select Management Details. I have to choose the planting appropriate to my method, and as I'm deciding to engage with the environmental plantings method, I'll select Mixed Species Environmental Planting. I'm looking to plant up a few hectares of biodiverse planting at a density of about 1,000 stems per hectare. Now I have decided I will click Add Events and then Finished. You will need to look at your chosen method as it will tell you what type of regime aspects are fixed and what you can choose. Under the method that I am using, I should have chosen tube stock at high density, so I realise I've made a mistake in selecting the wrong density, but it's okay, I can easily fix that. I'll just right click on the rotation and select Delete, and then I can return to the previous step in adding a new rotation. This time I choose high density and add the event. Now I'm happy with my rotation selection. Note that I can see information about the planting by clicking the little plus sign. This shows the growth properties and also the timelines for planting. I can see the start date, which I've already entered here. Under current rules, it is expected that the planting runs for 100 years or shorter periods like 25 years with discount rates. I need to weigh up these options to make a good business decision, but I'd like to store the carbon for as long as possible, so I'll let the planting run for 100 years. I'll also use the default settings for weed control as shown here. With all this sorted, I'm now ready to view and interpret my results. When you go through the tool, you might be feeling adventurous, and there are many more options available to look at in terms of events. Events are, of course, different treatments that can be applied to the planting project. By clicking on the Add Events button underneath the Events section, I can add in a variety of management options such as fertilizer regimes and harvesting. Also, I can select events like forest fires or pests and diseases to see their effect on my carbon stock. These are important things to consider, so I recommend once we've run through the standard model, have an explore of their carbon effects for yourself, but I won't add any more in here. As you can see, the Results tab has now changed colour. When I click the Results tab, the RMT will calculate the amount of carbon stored in my CEA and present the information graphically and in table format. It's important to note here that these values show tonnes of carbon, not carbon dioxide or ACCUs, which must be converted and analysed before they are used for calculating net abatement. The RMT initially presents the carbon sequestered as a graph. What it shows is the tonnes of carbon sequestered on the left axis and time on the bottom axis. Each of the different lines represent different parts of your planting. The red line at the bottom represents emissions from fire, which will be flat unless a fire event has been included. The purple line is the carbon mass of forest debris, in other words, the leaves, sticks and twigs that accumulate on the ground. The green line is the amount of carbon stored only in the trees, including roots. And the blue line is total carbon. In other words, the sum of trees and debris minus any emissions from fire. So it looks like for my back paddock, I'm going to get just over 4,000 tonnes of carbon sequestered over 100 years. Not too bad. While the graphical representation is useful to see how the carbon stock changes over time, it is of far more use for me to know the exact numbers of carbon sequestered. I can do this by clicking on the table button above the graph, and then I can see the figures that inform the model. You can scroll down to see the change in carbon over time. An important factor to consider here is that these figures are for the total area of my CEA. If I want to know a carbon per hectare value, then I must divide the carbon stock number by the total number of hectares. Another thing to make sure I see here is that the amount of carbon is the cumulative amount, not the amount taken up per year. I'd have to divide the total number of years to understand the average amount of carbon taken up by the planting. And as I mentioned earlier, and this is an important one, these values are carbon, not carbon dioxide nor ACCUs. These are my raw carbon values, and I must look at my specific method as to what should be calculated using them. The RMT reruns the model each time, so I always save and export the spreadsheet to document my work. This is easily done by clicking in the top right Export Results To and selecting my program of choice. I'm choosing Excel. And I'm now saving it as Backpaddock. If I wanted to run the model again and try different combinations of trees, I just need to return to the Management tab. Otherwise, I'll save my project area as a reforestation modelling output file, and I'll need to do this for each CEA I create within the RMT. This helps with opening my plot again at a later date for audit, updating events, and/or submitting to the Clean Energy Regulator. If I'm happy with the output, it will form a part of my final report and will be validated by auditors for the net abatement figures of my project. I save it by going to File, clicking on Save, giving it an appropriate name, and saving to the correct place. I've completed a run of the reforestation modelling tool, and I hope you now explore the tool yourself. Thanks for watching.